August 14, 2003, in the heart of rural Newton County, Missouri, the air hung thick and humid, a stifling blanket woven from damp earth, and the distant resinous scent of pine. The oppressive silence was broken only by the incessant, high-pitched buzz of cicadas and the subtle rustle of unseen wildlife in the dense Ozark canopy. Sheriff Ben Carter, his khaki uniform clinging uncomfortably to his back, squinted, his eyes adjusting to the dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves. Ahead, barely visible through the encroaching foliage, a dilapidated, mud-caked pickup truck sat idling. Its headlights, weak and yellow, struggled to pierce the gloom of the overgrown woods, casting an eerie glow on a crude, hand-painted sign. Private property, keep out. This wasn't just another remote property. This was the rumored Blackwood family compound, a place more legend than reality. The treacherous, unpaved track leading deeper into the Blackwood property felt less like a road and more like a forgotten scar on the ancient landscape. Each jarring bump and deep rut testified to its disuse and the family's profound isolation. Locals had always whispered about the Blackwoods, a reclusive clan who shunned the modern world for generations, their existence a fading echo of rugged Ozark individualism. Sheriff Carter, a native, understood these stories. Tales of fierce independence, of a family keeping entirely to themselves, their compound a shadowy fortress against outsiders. What began as a routine welfare check, prompted by a vague, anonymous tip, now felt significantly heavier, charged with an unspoken tension. The oppressive quiet deepened, the cicadas, drone, an ominous warning, a collective breath held before an unsettling revelation. Every instinct in Sheriff Carter's gut screamed this wasn't just about neglected property or a minor dispute. The very air around them hummed with unspoken secrets, the kind that festered in deep isolation, hidden away from the prying eyes of the outside world. This was the threshold not just to a family's land, but to a hidden world that had escaped scrutiny for generations. What began as a simple welfare check, meant to ensure the basic safety of children, was now poised to unveil something far more disturbing than any local legend could conjure. Something that would shake the very foundations of their quiet Ozark community. What unimaginable truths, both human and genetic, had been nurtured in these remote, forgotten woods, shielded by decades of silence and that stark, forbidding keep out sign. The initial spark for Sheriff Carter's journey into the Blackwood enigma came as a scratchy, barely intelligible phone call to the Newton County Sheriff's Department earlier that week. The caller, anonymous and seemingly nervous, whispered about something wrong with the Blackwood children, a vague but unsettling report that had gnawed at Carter. He knew the Blackwoods. Everyone in Newton County did, at least by reputation. They were the embodiment of Ozark reclusiveness, a family fiercely guarding their privacy, a relic from a bygone era. Now, as his patrol car bumped along the increasingly treacherous path, the private property, keep out sign loomed, a stark, defiant challenge. This wasn't just a welfare check. It felt like an intrusion into a forgotten world, a necessary breach of an unspoken pact of non-interference governing these hills for generations. The air grew heavier, thick with anticipation and dread of what lay beyond the tree line. Pulling up to what loosely resembled a yard, Sheriff Carter and Deputy Miller, a fresh-faced rookie still learning rural policing's nuances, were met by a tableau of neglect. A dilapidated cabin, its porch sagging, emerged from the overgrowth. Before they could even knock, a gaunt, weathered woman, Elara Blackwood, appeared in the doorway, eyes narrowed with suspicion. Beside her, a powerfully built but withdrawn man, Jedediah, stood a silent sentinel. Their refusal was immediate and absolute. "Ain't no children here needing help from your kind," Elara rasped, her voice as brittle as dried leaves. Yet, from somewhere deep within the cabin, faint, childish sounds drifted out, quickly stifled. And then there was the smell. A pervasive, sweet-sour odor spoke of unwashed bodies, stale food, and something far more disturbing. A scent lingering in the humid air, undeniable and deeply concerning. The Blackwoods' steadfast refusal to cooperate, coupled with the faint sounds and the unmistakable stench, provided Sheriff Carter with the probable cause he needed. He returned to the county seat, gut-churning, and worked to secure a search warrant. This was a delicate balance, upholding law while respecting the deep mistrust of authority in these isolated hollows. Yet the welfare of children superseded local custom or desire for autonomy. The next morning, armed with a warrant and a renewed sense of urgency, Carter and Miller returned. This time, there was no gentle knock. The door, old and weathered, creaked open under Carter's firm hand, revealing an interior worse than the outside suggested. The overwhelming stench hit them first, a suffocating wave of decay, grime, and something profoundly animalistic, making Miller visibly wince. Navigating through the dim, cluttered single room, a tangle of dirty blankets, broken furniture, discarded food scraps, Carter's eyes scanned for any sign of the children. The air was thick and heavy, each breath a struggle against the odor. In a small, unlit back room, partially obscured by a rag, Deputy Miller's flashlight beam cut through the gloom. It illuminated a young woman, Sarah Blackwood, frail, silent, huddled on a stained mattress, cradling two tiny bundles. As the beam settled, a collective gasp escaped them. Two infants, barely 6 months old, lay in her arms. But it wasn't their small size or neglect that shocked them. It was their faces, where eyes should have been, only smooth, unnerving depressions. The profound, horrifying absence of sight was a visceral punch to the gut, a silent scream of unspeakable tragedy. Dr. Lena Hansen, a dedicated Child Protective Services CPS worker for MODSS, immediately began the arduous task of piecing together the Blackwood family's fragmented history. Her initial foray into official records proved almost fruitless. There were no birth certificates for Elias and Ezra, nor for the two older children removed from the compound, a clear violation of state law. Marriage licenses for Jedediah and Sarah were similarly absent, a red flag indicating a deliberate evasion of the formal system. Sheriff Carter, meanwhile, took on the equally challenging task of interviewing reluctant locals. These were people who had known of the Blackwoods for generations but had always respected the unspoken boundary, their knowledge of the family largely anecdotal and shrouded in rumor. Yet, bits and pieces began to surface, stories of deep-rooted isolation and a family that kept to themselves, reinforcing the chilling reality that this was a world deliberately hidden from public scrutiny. Expanding the search, Sheriff Carter delved into Newton County's archaic property deeds and census records, revealing a lineage that stretched back over a century, firmly anchoring the Blackwoods to their remote patch of Ozark wilderness. These records confirmed generations of Blackwoods living on the same land, a testament to their fierce, almost religious, commitment to isolation. However, the familial connections within these historical documents were often ambiguous, names repeating with unsettling frequency, hinting at a dangerously constricted gene pool. The whispers from the community, once dismissed as mere folklore, now took on a grim prescience. Tales of Blackwoods, only marrying other Blackwoods, or close cousins, were now chillingly plausible. This was not just a family choosing privacy, it was a self-imposed genetic island, cut off from the broader human current, where ancient practices had been allowed to fester, unseen and unchallenged. The shocking discovery of the twins, anophthalmia, coupled with the profound neglect and the family's deep-seated reclusiveness, quickly escalated the investigation beyond local capabilities. The Missouri State Highway Patrol's Division of Drug and Crime Control, with its specialized forensic units, was called in to meticulously process the Blackwood cabin and its surrounding property. Every artifact, every scrap of paper, every biological sample became a potential clue in understanding the full scope of the family's existence. While not a federal crime in its immediate scope, The unique genetic implications and the sheer isolation of the Blackwoods prompted consultations with national databases, seeking any similar, unexplained cases of genetic anomalies or patterns of extreme familial isolation that might offer parallels or insights into this unprecedented situation. At the University of Missouri Healthcare, Dr. Evelyn Reed, a renowned geneticist, began her meticulous examination of Elias and Ezra. The initial medical reports had already confirmed bilateral anophthalmia, a condition so rare that its appearance in twins, especially in such an isolated context, immediately raised a red flag for genetic factors. Dr. Reed's expertise was critical. She ordered comprehensive blood samples from the infants, Sarah and Jedediah, initiating a rigorous genetic analysis. Her initial assessment, based on the phenotypic presentation and the family's documented history of isolation, strongly suggested severe consanguinity. The scientific journey to unravel the Blackwood enigma had begun, moving from the squalor of the cabin to the microscopic world of DNA, where the true, tragic story of their lineage was about to be laid bare. Dr. Reed's genetic analysis delivered a stark and irrefutable truth: severe consanguinity. The DNA results confirmed what the family's isolation and the twins' condition had strongly implied. Within the Blackwood family, generations of intermarriage had drastically reduced the genetic diversity, leading to a perilous concentration of recessive genes. Specifically, Dr. Reed's team identified the precise gene mutations responsible for the twins, anophthalmia, directly linking their profound disability to the family's dangerously intertwined lineage. She explained how, under normal circumstances, such a rare recessive gene might remain dormant for generations, but with repeated intermarriage, the probability of two carriers mating and passing on two copies of the faulty gene to their offspring escalated exponentially. This was not an act of God, as Alara might claim, but a tragic, predictable outcome of a closed gene pool. The initial custody hearing in the Circuit Court of Newton County was not a straightforward affair. Judge Thompson, a man of deep local roots and a profound understanding of Ozarks sensibilities, faced an unusual challenge. The Blackwoods, represented by a court-appointed public defender, Marcus Thorne, presented an unexpected and unyielding front. Thorne, though clearly navigating unfamiliar legal territory with the genetic complexities, argued passionately for the family's inherent right to cultural and religious freedom, portraying the state's intervention as an egregious overreach into a private, self-sufficient way of life. Alara, gaunt but defiantly stoic, sat rigid beside Jedediah and Sarah, her eyes fixed on the judge, a silent yet palpable accusation against the system she believed was unjustly tearing her family apart. For her, there was no neglect, only a profound, generations-old tradition. The courtroom atmosphere was thick, with the tension of two irreconcilable worlds colliding. Dr. Lena Hansen, despite her professional tenacity and dedication, immediately felt the daunting weight of the Blackwoods, deep-seated mistrust, and outright resistance. Preparing for the crucial hearing meant gathering comprehensive evidence and securing further assessments, but the family vehemently refused any additional cooperation. Alara and Jedediah flatly denied access to the older children for essential medical and developmental evaluations, citing, quote, divine will, and adamantly claiming the state possessed no legitimate right to interfere with their children. Even Sarah, who had previously shown flashes of vulnerability, now echoed their defiance, likely under immense family pressure. This deliberate obstruction forced Sheriff Carter to repeatedly serve court orders, each interaction escalating the tension and highlighting the significant uphill battle faced by MODSS. It wasn't merely a legal skirmish, it was a cultural siege. The judge, ever cautious and acutely aware of the community's ingrained sensitivities regarding outside interference, initially granted only temporary custody of the children to MODSS, delaying a permanent decision. This ruling, while not a full defeat for the state, represented a significant and frustrating obstacle. Judge Thompson expressed profound concern about fully severing parental rights without an irrefutable, scientifically sound explanation. that could definitively withstand the Blackwood family's impassioned cultural and traditional defense. He specifically requested Dr. Reed's direct testimony, emphasizing the critical need for clear, understandable evidence of the genetic link to the twins, anophthalmia. This legal pause gave the Blackwoods a temporary reprieve and dramatically amplified the pressure on Dr. Reed to translate complex genetic science into terms a rural Missouri court could not only understand, but, more importantly, accept as definitive proof of neglect and inherent danger. The Missouri State Highway Patrol's Division of Drug and Crime Control descended upon the Blackwood compound with a methodical precision alien to its ancient dirt. Specialized forensic teams, usually reserved for violent crime scenes, began the painstaking process of cataloging every item within the dilapidated cabin and its immediate surroundings. Technicians in sterile suits meticulously collected soil samples, hoping to trace environmental contaminants, while an entomologist carefully bagged insect specimens, which could indicate the duration and conditions of neglect. Every surface was dusted for prints, every corner examined for hidden compartments, and advanced LiDAR scanning created a detailed 3D model of the property, revealing hidden paths and long-forgotten structures that spoke volumes about generations of self-sufficiency. This wasn't just evidence collection. It was an archaeological dig into a living, yet profoundly isolated, family history. Beyond the squalor, the forensic analysis began to reveal a stark picture of subsistence living, almost devoid of modern amenities. There was no evidence of running water or electricity, relying instead on a well and kerosene lamps, further exacerbating the unsanitary conditions. Food remnants primarily consisted of wild game, foraged plants, and rudimentary staples, indicating a diet severely lacking in essential nutrients, a likely contributor to the older children's observed developmental delays. Trace evidence analysis uncovered alarming levels of various pathogens and parasites, consistent with prolonged exposure to unhygienic environments and untreated water. This was not merely poverty, it was a deliberate, generational rejection of public health standards, a self-imposed return to conditions that modern society had long since eradicated, leaving the children dangerously vulnerable. With the Blackwood name now emblazoned across local headlines, a few more cautious whispers began to emerge from the deeply private Ozark community. Sheriff Carter revisited several elderly residents, folks who had lived in Newton County their entire lives, their memories stretching back generations. They spoke of the Blackwoods' absolute refusal of any government aid, of their infrequent, almost furtive trips into town for bartering rather than buying, and of their children never attending school. One old-timer recalled seeing a Blackwood woman give birth at home decades ago, without a doctor or midwife, confirming a long-standing pattern of eschewing formal medical care and official documentation. These anecdotes, once dismissed as local color, now took on a chilling significance, explaining the absence of birth certificates and the profound lack of medical history for any of the Blackwood children. Meanwhile, Dr. Evelyn Reed's team at the University of Missouri Healthcare delved deeper into the genetic landscape of the Blackwood family. While the primary gene mutation for anophthalmia in Elias and Ezra was confirmed, further sequencing revealed a cascade of other recessive conditions, some dormant, others manifesting in subtle cognitive and physical impairments in Sarah and Jedediah, and the older children. The family's refusal to cooperate with further medical examinations, particularly for Jedediah and Sarah, presented a significant obstacle to a complete understanding of their health profiles. However, Dr. Reed was able to extrapolate much from the existing samples and the detailed phenotypic observations of the children, solidifying the scientific argument that their isolation had created a genetic time bomb, exploding with each successive generation. The confluence of forensic evidence, genetic data, and the growing body of anecdotal history painted an irrefutable, albeit tragic, picture. The Blackwood compound was not just a home. It was a living testament to generations of deliberate, severe isolation that had culminated in profound medical and developmental neglect. Every piece of the puzzle, from the absence of birth records to the specific genetic mutations, now linked directly back to the family's self-imposed cultural and biological fortress. For the upcoming custody hearing, the state's legal team, working closely with Dr. Hansen and Sheriff Carter, was meticulously preparing to present a case that went beyond simple neglect, arguing that the Blackwoods' deeply ingrained way of life inherently endangered their children, demanding an intervention unprecedented in its scope and implications for the Ozark community. Sheriff Carter's persistent and patient questioning of the long-term residents of Newton County finally yielded a breakthrough, not from official records, but from the hushed corners of memory. One afternoon, after hours spent on a creaking porch, an elderly woman named Martha Gable, whose family had lived near the Blackwood property for generations, lowered her voice to a barely audible whisper. Her eyes, filled with a mixture of fear and reluctant truth, recounted an incident from nearly 3 decades prior. She spoke of a time when Alara Blackwood, then in her late 40s, had suddenly disappeared from public view for several months, only to reappear with a newborn she claimed was a gift from God, but which Martha's mother, a keen observer of local goings-on, had always suspected was Alara's own child, not a grandchild. This long-buried secret, once dismissed as mere gossip, now took on a chilling, undeniable weight. Martha's mother, having helped with deliveries in the past, had noted the child's unusual features and Alara's fierce, almost obsessive possessiveness. The timeline Martha described aligned precisely with Jedediah's birth year, a stark and horrifying implication that Jedediah was not merely Alara's grandson, but her biological son, a product of incest that had been meticulously concealed for decades within the impenetrable confines of the Blackwood compound. This revelation didn't just deepen the family's genetic plight, it exposed a deliberate act of profound social transgression, a direct and immediate link to the severe consanguinity that afflicted the twins. The implications of Martha's testimony were immediate and devastating, ripping through the carefully constructed narrative of simple isolation and tradition. It shifted the investigation from a case of severe neglect due to generational reclusiveness to one potentially involving deliberate criminal acts of incest and child endangerment spanning decades. Sheriff Carter immediately dispatched deputies to secure new warrants, this time focusing on gathering DNA evidence from Jedediah and Alara themselves, not just for genetic analysis of the twins, but to confirm this unspeakable family secret. The Blackwood enigma had just taken a profoundly darker turn, revealing a deliberate pattern of hidden, destructive behavior at its core. The hushed corners of Newton County didn't stay hushed for long. Martha Gable's whispered confession, once a local secret, had ripped open a Pandora's box. When Sheriff Carter executed the new warrants, word inevitably leaked. Local news channels, sensing a story far more sensational than cattle rustling or petty theft, descended on Newton County like a swarm, their satellite trucks and reporters with microphones quickly transforming the sleepy town square into a media circus. The Blackwood name, previously synonymous with reclusiveness, was now emblazoned across every regional evening broadcast, morphing from an Ozark legend into a national scandal. Residents, accustomed to their quiet lives, found themselves caught in a maelstrom of flashing cameras and insistent questions, some defending their neighbors' right to privacy, others expressing a mix of horror and morbid curiosity. The sheer volume of external attention was unprecedented, a jarring intrusion into their insular world. The Blackwood compound, once an invisible fortress, became the reluctant epicenter of this media storm. Reporters, undeterred by the private property signs, staked out the perimeter, hoping for a glimpse of the enigmatic family. Alara, her gaunt face now a grim mask of defiance, occasionally emerged to hurl accusations at the journalists, her raspy voice caught on camera denouncing them as vultures and agents of the devil. Jedediah and Sarah, however, remained hidden, their already profound isolation deepening under the harsh glare of public scrutiny. Sheriff Carter, understanding the volatility of the situation, had to deploy extra deputies to manage the crowds and maintain peace around the property, ensuring the ongoing investigation wasn't compromised by the intrusive spectacle. The family, besieged in their own home, became symbols of a vanishing way of life, now brutally exposed. As the local story gained traction, National news outlets quickly picked it up, transforming the Blackwood enigma into a wider, more unsettling narrative about forgotten America. Cable news pundits debated the ethical implications of state intervention versus deeply ingrained cultural practices. Geneticists appeared on morning shows, explaining the science of consanguinity and its devastating effects, using the Blackwood case as a stark, real-world example. Child welfare advocates spoke passionately about the vulnerability of children in isolated communities, while legal experts dissected the complex interplay of privacy rights and state protections. The intense public interest created immense pressure on Judge Thompson and the Missouri Department of Social Services, demanding swift and decisive action, yet also fueling a backlash from those who saw it as an attack on rural independence. Against this backdrop of escalating public and media frenzy, Sheriff Carter and Dr. Lena Hansen braced themselves for the next phase of the legal battle. Serving the new warrants for DNA collection from Ilara and Jedediah proved to be a volatile confrontation, met with fierce resistance and outright refusal, requiring the physical presence of multiple deputies. The Blackwoods, fueled by Ilara's unwavering conviction, viewed these demands as a final, unforgivable violation. The upcoming custody hearing, no longer a quiet local affair, would now unfold under the harsh spotlight of national attention, with every word and every piece of evidence scrutinized by a divided public. Newton County, once a picture of rural tranquility, found its soul laid bare, grappling with uncomfortable truths about tradition, isolation, and the price of unchecked secrecy. The Circuit Court of Newton County buzzed with a nervous energy, a palpable shift from the usual quiet proceedings. Every seat was filled, the air thick with anticipation, as Dr. Evelyn Reed, a figure of calm authority in her sharp suit, approached the witness stand. Judge Thompson, his expression grave, watched her intently. A large screen descended, and, as a complex, almost grotesque genealogical chart of the Blackwood family tree, resembling a tangled, inward-growing vine, materialized behind her, a collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. It was a stark visual, immediately conveying the deep, unsettling truth of generations confined within their own lineage, each branch twisting back upon itself in a horrifying pattern. Dr. Reed's voice, clear and unhurried, cut through the tension. With clinical precision, she pointed to various nodes on the projected chart, explaining how Jedediah and Sarah, the parents of Elias and Ezra, shared multiple common ancestors within just a few generations. She elaborated on the genetic principle, how this extreme consanguinity dramatically increased the probability of recessive genes, normally dormant, manifesting in their offspring. The specific gene mutations responsible for the twins, anophthalmia, the complete absence of their eyes, were identified, directly linking their profound disability to the family's dangerously intertwined lineage. It wasn't an act of fate, but a tragic, predictable consequence of their isolated existence. Ilara Blackwood, seated at the defense table, remained a picture of defiant incomprehension, her gaunt face set in a mask of unyielding denial, her eyes fixed on the judge, rejecting the scientific truth as an affront to her family's ways. But beside her, Sarah, usually so stoic and withdrawn, finally broke. A single, silent tear tracked a path down her cheek, followed by another, a rare and heart-wrenching display of emotion that spoke volumes. Judge Thompson, his own face etched with the weight of the moment, listened intently, the undeniable scientific evidence colliding head-on with the deep-rooted traditions and tragic ignorance of the Blackwood family. The court's decision was an undeniable watershed. Judge Thompson, his voice heavy with the weight of both justice and cultural sensitivity, ruled unequivocally in favor of the Missouri Department of Social Services. Elias and Ezra, the twins whose silent suffering had brought this hidden world to light, along with their older siblings, were permanently removed from the Blackwood family's custody. They were immediately placed into specialized foster care, a journey towards adoption by families equipped to provide the extensive medical and developmental support their unique needs demanded. Jedediah and Sarah, their faces etched with a mix of confusion and despair, faced charges of child endangerment and severe neglect. Recognizing their profound cognitive limitations and the generations of systemic isolation that had shaped their lives, the judge opted for a path of rehabilitation over pure punishment, mandating intensive educational and social integration programs rather than lengthy prison sentences. Ilara Blackwood, the defiant matriarch, was placed under the care of Adult Protective Services, her ancient world irrevocably dismantled. The Blackwood case, once a local whisper, exploded into a brief, shocking national headline. It ripped open the veneer of rural tranquility, exposing the hidden realities of extreme isolation in forgotten pockets of America. In Newton County, the verdict sparked an intense, often painful debate about the delicate balance between family privacy and the state's undeniable responsibility to protect its most vulnerable. Conversations rippled through diners and church pews about access to health care, education, and social services, particularly for those living in the most remote Ozark hollows. For the Blackwood family itself, their centuries-long isolation was shattered, not with a bang, but with the slow, agonizing grind of legal proceedings and public scrutiny. It forced a painful, unwilling adaptation to a world they had so fiercely rejected, leaving an indelible scar on their lineage and on the community that had, for so long, looked away. While the Blackwood case didn't immediately trigger sweeping legislative changes, its stark realities served as a poignant example for policymakers across Missouri and beyond. It underscored the critical need for increased funding and targeted programs designed to address rural poverty, promote genetic counseling awareness, and strengthen child welfare services in America's most remote regions. The Blackwood enigma became a cautionary tale, a powerful reminder that even in the most secluded corners, society has a collective responsibility to its children. The ripples of their story continue to be felt, prompting us to look closer at the unseen. If this deeply affecting case has moved you, if it has made you question the hidden corners of our world, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and watch our next investigation into another intense story that challenges our understanding of community and justice.